this is my setup. I have this is a 2x6" piece of Douglas fir that I picked up at the big box hardware store. And I cut it to length, which is slightly shorter than the actual neck, and then cut some notches here. That way I can clamp the Douglas fir into my bench vise and then attach the neck with a couple of clamps. And the neck overhangs its entire length, so I have easy access to both sides. The actual carving I'm going to do is going to be done with a coarse Japanese Iwasaki file. This is a really cool file in that it has razor sharp teeth, and it will remove wood very quickly, and will allow me to get to the contour I want pretty fast. And then once I get that to where I want it to be, then I can start working up through the grits with sandpaper. So the wood that this neck is made out of is Eastern Rock Maple, which is my preferred choice for neck woods. It's extremely strong, durable, resists warpage, and it's a very hard wood, so you'll get a very stable neck out of it. But it does take a little bit of elbow grease to carve it. Now this particular piece, the shaft of the neck, excluding the fretboard, is about 1 inch thick. I typically go anywhere from about 7/8 to about 1 inch. I rarely go over that because then you have to carve away so much more wood to get to the neck thickness that I want to get. So, and I'll be measuring the thickness using my digital calipers at the 1st fret and then at the 12th fret. And I have numbers in mind for what I want. At the 1st fret, I want it to be about 0.8 inches thick, and then at the 12th fret about 0.9 inches. So that's what I'm going to shoot for. What I'm basically doing is carving a 45-degree angle in the neck. Really, when I do this, I actually will cut this on my bandsaw at a 45-degree angle. But that is a really dicey technique, and it's something you've got to have a lot of practice at. Otherwise, you can, if you cut slightly crooked, you can ruin the neck. So I'm just going to omit that step, and I'm just going to carve the 45 with my Iwasaki file, and you'll see that it can generate that 45-degree chamfer pretty fast. Another way to do this, you'll see a lot of guys use spoke shaves. And I used to use the spoke shave, and I think the only reason why I quit using it is because I was out in the garage one morning when it was extremely cold, and I was carving away, and it slipped out of my hand, hit the floor, and broke, and I just never got around to replacing it. And about the same time, I got these files and found that I enjoyed using these much more. Another thing to be aware of is I'm going to have kind of a slight volute up here, and then I have the heel. So as I'm rough carving this 45, and I'll be doing it on both sides, I want to kind of stay away from those areas. I'll work into that later on, but if I start digging into it now, it's easy to go too far, and that's especially critical on the heel, because if you carve too far, it's going to look strange when you attach it to the body. You're liable to have a gap. As you can see, this takes a lot of work. I'm out of breath. So that's one of the reasons why I'm very seriously looking at CNC. Another nice thing about these files is by changing the angle that you're carving, you can carve like this or you can carve like this. You can actually get a pretty coarse carving and then go back and remove a lot of those marks and get a pretty smooth carving. So generally I go with the roughest. This is kind of this motion. And then that leaves really coarse marks, but then I'll go back and do more of a straight up and down with lighter pressure, and that takes out those teeth marks. So that'll just shorten or reduce the amount of sanding that I'll have to do later on. Some of you may be wondering, what about that angle grinder I've seen you use? And that's basically the angle grinder. And this will create that 45-degree angle on each side in probably less than 20 seconds. The problem is, one slip with this tool and it takes about 15 seconds to make a piece of firewood. So I would only recommend these if you've got a lot of skill at using one. You might want to test on some scrap wood just to get a feel for how it works, because it tears away wood super, super fast. And since I'm not really in a big rush with this neck, there's no reason for me to go grinding away and risk ruining a neck. Although so far I've never ruined one, but I really am not in the mood to ruin one today. So I've got it's roughly a 45-degree chamfer that's been carved into both sides of the neck. And that leaves a center strip here, which is the next thing I need to remove. And what I'm going to do is I'll use the file to carve this down, and it'll be thickest here at the heel and thinnest up at the headstock. And the thickness at the first fret will be about 8/10 of an inch thick, and that's measured from the center of the back to the center of the fretboard just behind the first fret. Then just behind the 12th fret, from the center of the fretboard to the back, will be 9/10 of an inch. And I'll show you a trick that I use to help me quickly determine that as I'm carving. First thing I need to do is measure the distance from the center of the fretboard to the back of the neck behind the first fret. And that comes out to 1.055 inches. So I write down 1.055 and I'm going to minus 0.80055, and that's 0.255 inches. So what I have to do is I have to remove 0.255, which is just over a quarter of an inch. Alright, this is the trick that I use. What I've done is I put a mark in the center of the neck, which is exactly opposite of the first fret. Then I took a drill bit. This is about a 1/16 of an inch diameter drill bit. And I put a piece of tape on it. And the edge of that tape, the distance between the edge of the tape and the very tip of the bit is 0.255 inches. So what I'll do is I will drill to that depth and stop. Now I'll put another piece of tape on here. I'll take this one off, and I'll put another piece of tape that's 0.155 inches from the end, and then I will drill another hole which is exactly opposite of the 12th fret. With the neck clamped back onto my neck carving jig, so to speak, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my file and start carving from probably the front to the back, although it doesn't really matter. But I'll continue carving just along this spine until those two holes disappear. Once they are gone, I'm at the correct depth that I need to be. You got to remember to be respectful of where the volute is going to be up here. So I have an idea of where it's going to be. You may want to sketch it out with a pencil, though. I did that with the heel. Now as you're carving that contour, it may seem like it's taking forever. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to start to attack the edges again and just start rounding it over, and that will make carving the taper go a lot faster. You'll also notice you're starting to get that gradual round over, which is what you're after. But try to carve uniformly as you're working. Don't spend too much time on one side, or you'll start to get this kind of an oblique curve. As this neck is getting thinner, I'm getting close to this area where the volute is, and it's going to be about right in here. I can already see the shape taking form, and I'm using a half-round file, and one of the reasons I like to use a half-round file is because I can tip it up on its edge and carve, and that way I know where I'm carving to. If you're carving with the other edge, you can't see where you're cutting, where those teeth are actually contacting the woods. But with this way, you have a much better idea. And I'll just take very short, gradual strokes. Now at the 12th fret, I've put a mark in the bottom of that hole I drill. I don't know if you can see that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue working this area until that dot disappears. Okay, that mark is, for all intents and purposes, it's gone. So I am now at the depth that I want to be at the 12th fret. I still have a ways to go on the first, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to continue to work close to where the line is for my heel shape. And I don't have to get exact yet, because once this is done and sanded and everything, I'll put it into the body and check it again and make sure that I'm coming up to the right line, and then I'll just gradually sand until I get it just right. I also have to make sure I get the round contour. So I've got a bit of a flat spot here from bringing this area down, so I need to get it rounded over. Both the holes at the 12th fret and at the 1st fret are gone, so I've got the neck to the right thickness. But what I need to do now is take a straight edge and make sure that my contour and the taper is consistent from the heel to the headstock. And I can see just by checking this, I have a high spot here and a high spot right in here. So I'm going to need to take those down, and I'll keep checking it with my straight edge until there's no gaps like there is right here. Once that's nice and consistent, then we're ready to start sanding. And that's how I carve the contour of a guitar neck by hand. At this stage, I'm ready to start sanding out the tool marks that were left by the file, and I'll do that with like an 80 grit sandpaper, and then I'll work up through 100, 120, 150, 220, and I may go as high as 220 or even 320. But at that point, I'll start applying whatever finish that I decide to use, and then I can sand it even smoother after that. So I know a lot of people like to use these contour gauges to try to get an idea of what the shape of the neck is, and I think that's fine when you're first starting out, but I prefer to use touch. I like to run my hands down the length of the neck, and I also like to use light and shadow. You can tell as you turn a guitar neck, as the shadow moves across the surface, you can see what kind of a shape you've got, and it'll kind of give you an idea of where you need to concentrate more work to get a smooth, consistent contour and taper. And I can also feel low spots and high spots, and that I can decide whether I need to work more with files or whether I can just take care of those spots using sandpaper. And you know, it takes some experience, but I think once you've done a couple, it's not that difficult. I think a lot of people are intimidated by making guitar necks, and it really isn't something that you should have to fear. but there's a good chance even on the first time out that you'll have success making a good quality net. You just have to periodically and frequently check it to make sure that everything is coming along the way you want it to. So that's how I do it by hand.